Hey guys, tonight we slip off our shoes, step quietly into a misty morning in 17th century Japan, and find ourselves standing at the edge of a rice field, not a battlefield. The smell of damp earth rises around you, and the distant clack of wooden sandals echoes down a narrow path. You're wearing full samurai robes, the family crest stitched proudly into your sleeves. And yet, there's no sword at your side. That's right, you, the ultimate warrior, the walking embodiment of Bushido, forgot to bring your katana. Or did you? You glance down at your hands, calloused from years of sword training, and then at the woven basket in your arms, brimming with rice seedlings, not steel. You shift uncomfortably. This isn't what the stories promised. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through sticky mud in your best waraji sandals. All around you, samurai like yourself are bending over furrows, planting rice in perfect, meditative rows. Not a sword in sight. This is no punishment, it's duty. You see, a lot of people forget that while samurai were warriors, they were also landowners, tax collectors, and rice managers. And in feudal Japan, rice wasn't just food. It was currency, status, and survival all rolled into one tiny grain. Even the most battle-hardened samurai couldn't live on glory alone. No rice, no war. No war, no reason to be a samurai. And so, sword left hanging at home on its lacquered stand, you wade through ankle-deep muck, calculating harvest yields like some kind of glorified farmer accountant. Romantic? Not quite. Necessary? Completely. The average samurai stipend was measured in koku, enough rice to feed one person for a year. One koku wasn't just food, it was power. The more rice you could produce, the more you could control. No wonder daimyos sometimes told their retainers, no sword today, just shovel. You win wars in autumn, but you earn them in spring. Still, the friction between rice and blade created some comically awkward moments. Imagine showing up to a farming inspection in full armor. Clunky, sweaty, and totally useless for pulling weeds. That happened. More than once. You mutter under your breath about missing your blade. But even as you say it, you know better. Carrying it around the fields is a waste, and worse, an insult to your ancestors who believed a sword should only be drawn with purpose. There's a saying you once heard from an old retainer, chin bristling with gray hairs and wisdom. A samurai who sharpens his sword more than his mind will starve in winter. You didn't get it then. You do now. Still, part of you itches for steel. There's comfort in the weight, the balance, the way your fingers naturally find the hilt. But not today. Today you count rows and worry about pests and pray that the rains don't come too early. You're a warrior, sure, but tonight you go to bed dreaming about fertilizer ratios. Now, mainstream history loves to paint the samurai as full-time fighters, always ready to strike, sword gleaming under moonlight. But honestly, that's kind of a movie thing. Real-life samurai, especially during the peaceful Edo period, 1603 to 1868, spent more time handling ledgers than lances. Historians still argue whether this shift in samurai roles was a clever evolution or a tragic loss of their warrior spirit. Either way, by the 18th century, a sword was as much a symbol of identity as a tool of violence, which made days like this, muddy, swordless, and humbling, oddly profound. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some samurai were so obsessed with rice yields that they built personal irrigation systems and designed their own hybrid seedlings. One guy even reportedly named his favorite rice paddy after his wife. That's one way to combine love and carbs. You pause for water, wiping your brow, and glance at the horizon. There, barely visible in the haze, are the castle towers of your lord. Inside, bureaucrats are counting your future. Your rice. Your honor. You might not be holding a sword, but your every movement still determines the fate of your clan. Funny how war can look like weeding. Nearby, a younger samurai sighs and grumbles. Should have been born a merchant. You both laugh. Merchants can't carry swords, remember? But they also don't have to walk 10 miles before dawn to discuss fertilizer in the rain. Still, there's a quiet dignity to it. You're feeding the people. You're honoring your code. Even without your blade, you haven't stopped being samurai. Just a very muddy one. And as dusk settles over the paddies and the frogs start their evening concert, you realize something. There's a different kind of fight going on here. It's not about killing or conquest. It's about patience, resilience, and remembering that every sword ever swung started with a meal grown in dirt just like this. So yeah, sometimes samurai forgot their swords. Or maybe they didn't forget at all. Maybe they just knew when to leave it behind. The rain won't stop. It's been falling all morning in slow, heavy sheets, turning stone paths slick and flooding the wooden gutters of the castle town. Your sandals squeak with every step soaked through. And still you press on, clutching your finely embroidered kimono so it doesn't drag in the puddles. You reach the courtyard gate of your cousin's wedding, bow to the guards, and pass through, still feeling a little naked. Because today, of all days, you left your sword behind. You didn't forget it. No one forgets their katana like a spare fan or a hair comb. But see, wearing your katana with formal silk robes, like the many-layered kamishimo, creates a serious problem. That long, curved blade gets in the way. It bumps into furniture, knocks over tea sets, and worst of all, creases your oh-so-expensive outfit. And you know how samurai are about appearances. There's a whole etiquette just for how your sleeves should hang when bowing. So instead of strapping on your daisho, the katana and shorter wakizashi combo, you carefully tucked your swords away at home. It wasn't cowardice. It was fashion. The wedding begins with chanting. Incense drifts through the ceremonial hall, and everything glows golden from lantern light reflecting off polished wood. You sip sake slowly, and try not to sneeze as smoke stings your nose. It's all very elegant, until a drunken uncle topples a lacquer tray and starts yelling about the price of dowries. Eyes flash, hands twitch. Instinct makes you reach for your side, and remember, too late, that there's nothing there. Suddenly, this whole no-sword decision feels kind of dumb. You weren't the only one. Even high-ranking samurai, when attending festivals, banquets, or imperial ceremonies, often left their swords at home or carried only the wakizashi, tucked discreetly into their belt. Carrying a full katana at certain functions was considered not just clunky, it was rude. You glance across the room and see another guest, a Hatamoto, direct retainer of the shogun, delicately balancing his own situation. His robe is magnificent, silk brocade, embroidered cranes, absolutely exquisite. His sword, nowhere to be seen. It's a common thing. Samurai were obsessed with both honor and aesthetic. And let's be real, trying to look graceful while a yard of sharp steel clacks around your knees is like wearing a rocket launcher to prom. Historians still argue whether samurai left their swords behind at formal events because of etiquette, practicality, or an unspoken peace agreement among guests. Probably all three. Because when you put 40 status-conscious warriors in one room with alcohol and sharp blades, something's bound to get sliced besides the sashimi. But the weird part? There were actually laws about this. The Tokugawa shogunate, big fans of social control, issued sumptuary regulations about when and where samurai could wear their swords. Too showy at the wrong kind of party? You might be asked to leave. Or worse, fined. And you know how you feel right now, hands empty and awkward, wondering if a chopstick could be repurposed as a weapon? That's not new. There's a story, possibly apocryphal but fun, of a Kyoto noble who once showed up to a no performance with a katana so massive it knocked over a curtain divider when he sat down. They say the actor refused to go on stage until the guy either left or ditched the blade. Guess which one he chose? You glance at your sleeves again. Wrinkle-free. That's something, right? Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. Some samurai use decorative, non-functional swords at fancy events. Literally just hollow scabbards and hilts, fashion swords. All flair, no stab. Like wearing glasses with no lenses to look smarter. And these weren't cheap props either. Gold leaf, lacquer, mother-of-pearl inlays. Basically, a samurai's version of wearing Gucci to the village festival. A don't mess with me but also look how rich I'm accessory. But not everyone could afford a backup glam sword. That's why you're here today, uncomfortable in fine clothes, worrying whether you'll have to defend your cousin's honor with a hairpin. Eventually, the uncle is gently led away. Someone replaces the broken tray, and the music resumes. You exhale. Crisis averted. Your robe is dryish, your pride intact. You swirl your sake, savoring the quiet. And you think, what an odd life. A warrior raised to draw a blade in a breath, now praised for not bringing it to a party. You, who once faced bandits in the hills with a blood-stained blade, now calculate hem lengths and seating charts like a wedding planner in disguise. But you also remember this. In the age of peace under Tokugawa rule, violence was considered messy, crude. Real warriors showed restraint. And sometimes restraint meant not even bringing the thing that made you dangerous. Still, you secretly regret it. Not because you needed to fight anyone tonight, but because you missed the balance. The comfort, the subtle pressure on your hip, reminding you who you are. The ceremony ends. You bow. You eat too many rice cakes. And as you step back into the drizzle and make your way home, you promise yourself something. Next time, you're bringing the blade, even if it clashes with the kimono. The next morning arrives with the sound of bamboo slapping against a window screen. A gentle clack-clack from the garden. It's just the Shurshuro-doshi, a deer scarer, but it still startles you awake for a second. You roll over, stretch, and feel something missing, not physically, but in your gut. You didn't dream about the wedding or the tray or even the loud uncle. You dreamt of a battlefield. And in that dream, your sword wasn't at your side. Strange how even in sleep, the absence of steel can haunt you. So you rise, dress slowly, and go searching. Not for breakfast. For answers. Because you've started to wonder, how did we even get here? A class of warriors, trained from boyhood to wield blades like second arms, now regularly leaving them behind? You sip green tea, the bitter kind, and begin walking toward the shrine of the old general. They say he fought in the Genpei War, back when samurai really did carry their swords everywhere, including the toilet. Which, fun fact, is partly why early toilets in samurai households were set apart from the main home. Less about hygiene, more about sword-drawing space. Seriously, back then, the sword was everything. You were born, raised, tested, married, and sometimes even cremated with it. Boys were given mock wooden blades at age 5. By 12, they were practicing cuts on straw mats, and if they were lucky or unlucky, on condemned criminals. Real coming-of-age moments, samurai style. You reach the shrine and bow low before stepping under the torii gate. It's quiet here. The air smells like moss and old incense. A perfect place to think about all the things modern samurai are forgetting. You kneel, not to pray, but to remember. It's easy to forget how the katana got its mystical status. It wasn't just because of its curve or its deadly edge. It was because samurai weren't just swordsmen. They were poets, monks, farmers, tax collectors, and sometimes full-time bureaucrats. That duality mattered. The sword became a symbol. A tool, yes, but also a mirror. And a leash. See, in the Sengoku period, the age of constant war, you'd never not bring your sword. You wouldn't survive the week. But by the Edo period, peace came sweeping across Japan like a giant exhale. And when peace lingers too long, blades start to rust, both physically and culturally. Historians still argue whether the rise of bureaucracy in Edo Japan dulled the warrior's edge, or whether it simply forced samurai to evolve. Were they growing wiser? Or just growing softer? You lean back on your heels. The old general's statue stands watch. His stone face frowns at you like he's judging the fact that your blade is still at home, propped neatly on a lacquered rack. But here's the kicker. Some samurai didn't just forget their swords, they faked forgetting them. There are records of lords showing up at rival castles without weapons on purpose. Not because they trusted each other, but because they wanted to create the illusion of trust. It was a trap, a power move. Imagine walking into a shark tank while pretending to be a goldfish. And if anyone called you out, "Oh, I must have been in such a rush. How forgetful of me." Right. There's even a theory that leaving your sword behind became a political signal. Like, see? I'm so confident you won't harm me. I didn't even bother bringing my blade. Bold. Or stupid. Depends on the outcome. One story tells of a daimyo who walked into his rival's fortress completely unarmed and was offered tea, sweets, and a knife in the ribs. He probably should have taken the hint when they served him the bitter kind of matcha. Of course, the line between brave and dead is usually only visible in hindsight. You glance around the shrine and spot an old votive plaque. Painted crudely, it shows a samurai holding a katana in one hand and a scroll in the other. Above it, a phrase in faint ink. Strike with steel, speak with wisdom. And that's it, isn't it? As the years passed, samurai were expected to be less like brawlers and more like balance beams. One foot in the martial world, the other in courtly elegance. You're expected to quote poetry and know how to cut a man in half from the collarbone down. Which explains why some carried swords not to fight, but to be seen. Your quirky tidbit for today. Some late Edo samurai purposely dulled their katana blades so they wouldn't accidentally hurt someone during a drunken moment or sudden gesture. Basically, performance swords. Like rubber knives in a stage play, but made of real steel. So you had warriors walking around with glorified costume props, bowing deeply, making social rounds, sipping sake, and pretending nothing had changed. But everything had changed. You know this. You feel it. The katana isn't just a weapon anymore. It's a symbol of an older time trying to blend into a new age of order and compliance. You can wear it, sure, but only if it doesn't interrupt the flower arranging demonstration. The shrine bells ring softly in the breeze. You rise. Time to head back. As you walk through the city, you notice things differently. The guards at the gate wear their daisho proudly, but their hands don't hover near the hilts. Inside the tea shop, a young samurai sits sketching lotus flowers on rice paper, his sword resting on the floor beside him like a forgotten broom. Peace has changed people, and with peace comes the strangest luxury of all, the ability to leave your weapon behind without dying instantly. But deep down, you know this luxury has a price. A memory fades with each ceremony where the blade is unwelcome. A legacy gets a little lighter with every sheath left empty. You pause at your gate. Home again. Tomorrow, maybe you'll polish your katana. Feel the weight. Remember the sound it makes when you draw it just so. Not because you need it, but because forgetting it too often might mean forgetting who you are. You stand at the edge of the tatami mat, your feet bare, your mind crowded. That old shrine smell, smoke, dust, pine, still clings to your sleeves. And now you're staring at the katana on its stand. The curve of the blade seems different today, like it's leaning forward ever so slightly, begging to be remembered. You kneel, not to pick it up, just to be close, because you're starting to understand something. A forgotten sword isn't always an accident. Sometimes it's a choice, and choices have reasons, ones that stretch beyond convenience or carelessness. Let's rewind again. This time, let's crawl into the minds of the samurai during the Tokugawa shogunate. The long, peaceful centuries. The years where no major wars broke out, where the biggest danger was paper cuts from bureaucracy. You're a samurai, but your enemy now is boredom. And paperwork. Mountains of it. You've become a glorified tax collector. Or a castle clerk. Or maybe a diplomat who delivers letters and bows a lot. It's a full-time job of not dying, but also not doing anything remotely sword-worthy. So what happens? You leave your blade at home. Just once. Maybe it's raining. Maybe it's a short walk. Maybe you're only going to the corner to get pickled radish and that weird salty plum candy you pretend not to like, but secretly hoard in your drawers. And then nothing happens. You survive. No bandits. No surprise duels. No one calling you out for being dishonorable. Just a calm walk and a lighter obi belt. And the next time, you leave it again and again, until forgetting it becomes the new normal. But here's where it gets even more curious. Did you know that by the mid-Edo period, samurai were often required by law to not bring their swords into certain buildings? Temples, government offices, schools, noble households. You'd have to check your blade at the door like a coat in a restaurant. Imagine the indignity. You, born to wear the daisho, your paired swords, long and short, soul and spirit, now expected to hand them over to some half-asleep doorman who's chewing rice crackers. Still, these rules existed for a reason. There were too many accidents. Quirky fact of the day. There's a record from the 1720s of a samurai sneezing during a formal meeting and accidentally drawing half his blade because his arm flinched the wrong way. Everyone in the room screamed. The guy dropped his sword and tried to pretend he was stretching. He wasn't invited back. So the Tokugawa government, bless their over-regulating little hearts, decided it was safer for society if swords were left outside during peaceful affairs. No blade, no blood. Problem solved. But historians still argue whether this was an act of wisdom or control. Was the shogunate truly trying to protect harmony, or were they disarming their own class to prevent rebellion? Some say it was both, a clever mix of etiquette and leash. And here's another twist. Sword carrying started to become performative. Like the samurai you passed this morning on your way to the market. He's young, probably 15, wearing both swords, strutting like he's on a runway. But the katana's tied too high. The wakizashi bangs awkwardly against his knee. He looks dangerous to himself. You buy your vegetables and pass by him again. He's now showing off fake cuts in the air, trying to impress a pair of giggling girls. You shake your head and mutter. His blades probably never touched anything sharper than a melon. It's true. Sword duels were mostly outlawed. Public fights? Rare. Executions? Left to professionals. Which means many samurai never drew blood at all. They were raised in peace. Trained for a war that never came. So, what happens when you grow up being told your soul is your sword, but the world keeps telling you not to use it? Cognitive dissonance, cultural dissonance. Call it what you want, it messes with your head. So some responded by forgetting, others by reinventing. There's a man, let's call him Rensaburo. Lived in Osaka, mid-ranking samurai. Wore silk, filed reports, and hadn't drawn his sword in 10 years. One day, while walking past a noodle stall, he sees a drunken brawl. A farmer's cart has blocked the road. A merchant is shouting. A kid's crying. And what does Rensaburo do? He shouts, not draw your swords, but calm yourselves or I'll report you to the magistrate. No steel, just voice. And it works. That's the new power, not the sword, but the symbol. Authority without violence. Intimidation without drawing blood. Of course, not everyone bought into this pacifist upgrade. A few samurai still clung to the old ways, practicing alone in dojos, whispering ancient kata to themselves like forgotten prayers. Their swords were kept razor sharp. Their clothes always stiff with starch. But their eyes? Always a little hollow, like ghosts waiting for a battle that would never come. You think about that as you walk back from the market, and it hits you. Maybe samurai didn't forget their swords because they were careless. Maybe they forgot them because they were tired of pretending they still mattered. That's a heavy thought. You shift your bundle of vegetables and pass a group of children pretending to duel with sticks. One boy swings wildly, his blade a broom handle. The other freezes mid-step and shouts, "You forgot your sword again." Everyone laughs. And just like that, the weight lifts. Because forgetting your sword doesn't mean forgetting who you are. Not always. Sometimes it means adapting, reframing, waiting for the right moment to remember. Back at home, you unpack the groceries, hang your kimono, and sit near the blade again. This time, you rest your hand on it. No need to draw. No need to show off. Just remember. You wake up before the rooster. Not because you're disciplined, though sure, let's say that's part of it, but because the world is just too noisy. Even in the peaceful hush of a feudal morning, there's the clink of armor straps outside, the shuffle of sandals, the occasional startled meow from a cat that definitely wasn't supposed to be on the roof. You pull yourself up, stretch, and reach for your short sword, your wakizashi, not because you need it, but because it's comforting, like a weighted blanket with an edge. But wait, today you're visiting the court. A magistrate's hearing, followed by tea with a minor noble, followed by that very long, very awkward poetry recital you're expected to smile through. So, do you really need your full set of blades? You think for a moment. The katana stays on its stand. And just like that, your day begins, without your sword. By the middle of the Edo period, this was becoming less a shocking breach of tradition and more a quiet reality. Samurai life was shifting. The warrior was becoming a civil servant. And when you're spending more time writing poems or organizing rice deliveries than chasing criminals through the mist, well, you start to leave the heavy stuff at home. But it's not just logistics or law. Let's talk about something you probably didn't expect to show up in a samurai story. Fashion. That's right. The way of the sword slowly gave way to the way of the sleeve. During this period, Japanese clothing, especially for samurai, got more elaborate. Silks. Patterns. Those long sleeves that look majestic in a painting, but are absolutely the worst when you're trying to wear a katana without tripping over yourself. Imagine this. You're walking into a formal event, wearing a stunning kosoed robe with gold-threaded cranes on it, your family crest proudly displayed on your back. Now try tying a 2-foot curved sword to your hip without messing up the folds, or making it look like you've smuggled a canoe under your sash. Not easy. In fact, some samurai started carrying only the wakizashi, or even a fan, when they needed to appear in public. A fan. Yes, that delicate folded thing meant to stir air or hide your facial expressions became a kind of polite replacement for the deadly steel you used to wear. And the best part, no one batted an eye, because style had become the new strength. Display had become the new discipline. It wasn't about being able to kill someone at 20 paces. It was about showing that you didn't need to. Quirky fact for you. There was a fashion craze among Edo samurai involving folding fans made of lacquered bamboo, some of which were reinforced with iron ribs, just in case you needed to, block a sword with your accessory. They were called tezsen, or fans. And yes, they were absolutely the original multi-tool. You smile at the memory of the old story. The one about a samurai who disarmed a drunk ronin in a noodle shop using nothing but his fan and a well-timed glare. Of course, some say it was just exaggerated bar gossip, but still, Historians still argue whether tessen were truly effective weapons or just symbolic status pieces with sharp corners. Either way, it adds to the picture. The samurai wasn't devolving, he was evolving, learning how to navigate a new world where violence was uncool and poetry was king. And poetry, believe it or not, influenced this sword-forgetting trend in another subtle way: behavior codes. You've probably heard of Bushido, the so-called way of the warrior. But during the peaceful Edo period, Bushido got a massive remix. It shifted from battlefield bravery to inner discipline and etiquette. Books like Hagakure were written, not as battle manuals, but as guides for how to act like a samurai when there's no war to fight. So what happens when your cultural code prizes dignity, restraint, and poetic refinement? You stop lunging at every insult with your blade. You pause. Breathe. Quote a haiku. You leave your sword at home. Of course, not all samurai welcome this. You walk past one now, old gray, built like a barrel, with a katana strapped across his hip like a challenge. His face says, "I've killed," even though his knees say, "I probably shouldn't do stairs." You nod respectfully. He nods back. It's a kind of silent handshake. I see your sword, and I raise you my restraint. Because sometimes real power is in what you don't carry. But let's not get too romantic. There were still dangers, and samurai who left their swords behind sometimes paid the price. There's a story from 1784, Osaka. 3 young samurai went drinking at a riverside inn. 2 brought their swords. 1 didn't. They got into an argument over a kabuki actor's performance, because of course they did, and things escalated. Chairs overturned. A rice bowl flew. The unarmed one? He got stabbed in the arm with a chopstick. A chopstick. Historians have debated for years whether the injury was self-inflicted or an unfortunate ricochet from a noodle bowl. But still, it made the rounds. Don't be like Kenji, they'd say. He forgot his sword and left with a limp. Lesson learned. But not by everyone. The deeper issue was identity. As more samurai took on peaceful jobs, teachers, clerks, administrators, they started to lose that visceral link between sword and self. And that's hard. Like telling a firefighter he's now a desk worker. Or a race car driver she's now in charge of safety manuals. You miss the fire, the speed, the feeling of being needed. So forgetting your sword? Sometimes it wasn't forgetfulness at all. It was protest. A quiet rebellion against a system that said, smile, bow, collect taxes, stay calm. You look in the mirror before leaving the house. Your robe hangs just right. The sleeves flutter. The obi is tight. And the wakizashi? Tucked into your belt, not for battle, but for balance. You've found your middle ground. You step outside not with swagger, but with clarity. You'll attend the meeting. You'll drink the tea. You'll maybe roll your eyes at the poetry, but only on the inside. Because you've remembered something. Your sword doesn't define you, but you still know where it is. Just in case. The gravel path crunches gently under your feet as you wander toward the village checkpoint, not quite dreading, but definitely not looking forward to, the mandatory inspection. It's a strange thing, really. You're a samurai. You have status, a family crest, and ancestors who've probably beheaded more people than the town butcher's chopped fish. And yet here you are, preparing to be inspected like a misbehaving schoolboy. Why? Because times have changed, and with them, the rules about who gets to carry what and when. You reach the checkpoint gate. The guards are alert, but they don't bow too deeply. They're not disrespectful, just regulated. They're used to seeing people like you. Samurai dressed more like merchants, or merchants dressed like they wish they were samurai. The lines have blurred. Your two-sword status doesn't shine as brightly these days. You present your travel permit. One of the guards squints at the wax seal and nods. Then his eyes drift to your waist. Wakizashi check. Katana? Absent. Purpose of visit, he asks. You respond calmly. Delivering a report to Lord Kanda's retainer. He grunts. No sword. Not required for paperwork, you say with a small smile. He actually chuckles, waves you through. Here's the deal. During the Edo period, especially under Tokugawa rule, sword laws tightened like a rice barrel lid. Samurai had the exclusive right to wear 2 swords, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi, but that didn't mean they could carry them everywhere. There were public spaces, tea houses, court buildings, shrines, where leaving your blade at the door wasn't just polite. It was required. You ever try hanging your sword on a hook like a coat? Because that's what some samurai had to do. The real surprise? They didn't always mind. In fact, it often came as a relief. See, sword ownership came with expectations. If you were armed and present when violence broke out, even a petty scuffle, you were expected to act. And if you didn't intervene, that dishonor stuck like bad tofu. So sometimes, leaving your sword behind was the best way to avoid trouble. Which brings us to something unexpected. Samurai use swordlessness as a loophole. Let's say two drunk villagers start brawling in a noodle stall. You, the off-duty samurai with no blade on your hip, sip your tea and look the other way. Later, when someone accuses you of not stepping in, you simply shrug and say, "I had no sword. I couldn't escalate the situation." Just like that, you're off the hook. Some scholars call it tactical pacifism. Others say it was more about legal liability. But either way, historians still argue whether this behavior was cowardice or clever compliance. And that brings us to another wrinkle: Edo-era bureaucracy. You thought your job was to fight. Try filling out a tax exemption form for a rice surplus adjustment in a border village where nobody trusts the courier. That's your day now. And in meetings with local officials, many of whom aren't samurai, you're often told, with perfectly polite phrasing, to please refrain from bringing weapons into the discussion. You don't argue. You take notes. Which leads to this moment. You, attending a 3-hour presentation on riverbank maintenance policy, sitting in a room filled with scrolls, ink pots, and people who have definitely never held a sword. You glance around. Not a blade in sight. Just fans, pipes, and the occasional sneaky dagger hidden in a boot. You hope. The irony? Samurai became masters of both swordplay and paperwork. And yes, that's exactly as depressing as it sounds. But it wasn't all bad. The rules meant fewer duels. Fewer drunken midnight revenge missions. Fewer, "Oops, I spilled sake on your robe, so now we must duel to the death" situations. In a way, the Tokugawa shogunate's sword laws helped turn Japan into one of the most stable societies of its time. The long peace meant people lived longer, built stronger families, and developed elaborate art forms like kabuki, ukiyo-e, and haiku. Still, not everyone was happy. Some samurai chafed against the restrictions, especially those from poorer families who clung to their swords as a symbol of identity. For them, being asked to remove or surrender a blade was like being told they no longer mattered. It stung. There's an old tale you recall, maybe true, maybe not, about a young retainer named Naosuk who was denied entry to a lord's court for bringing his katana. Insulted, he refused to leave it outside, sat on the steps all day, sword across his lap, until the lord himself came out to speak with him. The two reportedly shared tea. The katana never entered the building. You think of that as you leave the court office, your satchel of scrolls bouncing against your side, not a blade in sight. A messenger passes you, panting, his sword half drawn from running. You sidestep him, letting his urgency pass like wind through bamboo. The truth is, sword regulations weren't just about safety. They were about hierarchy and control. The shogunate feared rebellion, and rightly so. The fewer armed men moving freely through the provinces, the easier it was to keep everyone in check. So while you, the obedient civil samurai, might leave your sword behind, the shogunate's elite guards, Hatamoto, never did. Their job was to show the power of the shogun, and they never forgot their blades, even in the bathhouse. No, seriously. Some wore dagger sheaths while bathing. That's commitment. Quirky fact. Certain temples and inns developed special sword lockers. Actual wooden compartments where guests could check their blades like you check coats at a restaurant today. Each slot was numbered, and some even had little tags with the owner's crest. It was the medieval Japanese version of valet parking, but for deadly weapons. You stop for a snack at a roadside stand. The vendor eyes your empty hip and says, "Off-duty, Samurai-sama?" You smile. "On duty, just civil today." He grins, passes you a skewer of grilled eel. Then you get the peaceful man's discount. You laugh and take a bite. The eel's perfect. Crispy on the outside, buttery inside. You savor it slowly. Behind you, someone shouts. Two farmers yelling over some spilled grain. Tempers flare. You stiffen, habit, but then glance down. No sword. You chew calmly. Not your fight. The moment passes. As you walk away, you realize forgetting your sword, or even purposefully leaving it, doesn't make you less of a samurai. It means you understand timing, discipline, the deeper meaning of strength. You still are the blade, whether it's on your hip or not. And tonight, when you return home, your katana will still be resting on its stand. Polished, ready, but untouched. Like wisdom you didn't need to prove. You sleep lightly as always. A breeze whispers through the paper walls. Somewhere, a night jar calls into the dark. Your hand twitches toward the place where your sword usually waits. Your old friend, your shadow. But you feel only the wooden floor. No blade tonight. Just silence. Morning arrives like soft thunder. Not loud, but full of energy. You rise, fold your mat, and tie your hair back with the routine grace of someone trained to be deadly before breakfast. But this morning, you'll need ink, not steel. You tuck your scroll case under your arm and walk into the village street, alive with the rustle of sandals, the sharp cries of fishmongers, and the gentle clang of distant temple bells. It's an ordinary day, except that you're headed into a castle. And no, you're not storming it. You're attending a meeting. How the mighty have shifted. This isn't the era of battlefield heroics anymore. It's the golden cage of Tokugawa bureaucracy. The samurai class is still respected, still feared in the right context. But now, many of you serve as civil administrators, tax collectors, postal supervisors, or, worst of all, castle clerks. Yep, castle clerks. Picture it, a grand, multi-tiered fortress, once the seat of warlords and burning ambition, now partially converted into a government office. The weapons racks are decorative. The armory is storage for rice records. In some castles, they've even turned training halls into courtrooms. And the sword racks? Replaced with shelves of scrolls and stamped paperwork. You step through the outer gate. Guards give you the once-over. One of them nods at your empty belt. Blade surrendered? You raise a brow. Of course. He gestures toward the side chamber, where visiting samurai must leave their swords. The walls are lined with numbered cubbies. Some are filled with ornate katanas, others with humbler blades. Yours would look average here, but today it's resting at home. You pass the cubbies with a small smile. Let the others worry about their precious steel. Because honestly, carrying your sword into castle bureaucracy is a burden. Not just physically, it's heavy after all, but politically. See, in the Tokugawa system, walking into a daimyo's hall with a sword was a signal. Depending on the situation, it could mean authority or arrogance. Misread the moment, and suddenly you're accused of overstepping. There's a phrase you hear whispered among older samurai. The blade makes the mouth speak louder than the heart. It's a warning. So many learned it the hard way. Historians still argue whether the shift toward swordless courtrooms was a reflection of peace, or a political maneuver to weaken the samurai's last emotional attachment to war. Either way, the result was the same. Entering a court armed was no longer brave. It was tacky. You make your way down polished corridors, your soft footsteps swallowed by tatami. You pass sliding screens painted with cranes and pine trees. And when you reach the council room, you bow, remove your sandals, and step in. No one else has a sword. What they do have is parchment. Lots of it. And seal stamps. Inkstones. Ledgers. Even abacuses. This isn't a war council. This is the great battlefield of rice allocation strategy. You sit quietly as Lord Canda's top administrator drones on about grain shipment discrepancies between prefectures. Across from you, another samurai from a neighboring province frowns at the charts. His brow is furrowed like a battlefield map. You smile to yourself. This is what power looks like now. Who controls the rice, who controls the flow of information. And you're getting quite good at it. Still, every now and then someone slips. Like the elder retainer who enters the room wearing both his swords, clearly trying to look impressive. Everyone falls silent. Not out of respect, but discomfort. He realizes it too late. His face turns the color of pickled plum, and he quickly excuses himself to leave them outside. Poor guy. You know that wasn't just a faux pas. It was a political signal gone wrong. Because the Tokugawa court understood symbols, and they regulated them strictly. You could carry your swords through the streets, sure, but bring them into a domain lord's private chamber uninvited? That was a challenge. Or at least, that's how it would be interpreted. A cheeky side note here. Some ambitious samurai figured out how to technically follow the rules while still being extra. They'd wear sword hilts, just the handles, tucked into their obi, no blade inside. Like wearing just the logo of a brand. It screamed, "I'm dangerous, but politely so." Others used wooden training swords lacquered to look real. You'd only know if you got close enough to test them, which, hopefully, no one ever did in a council meeting about road taxes. Quirky enough? But for you, the absence of a sword is calming. You're not here to posture. You're here to navigate. And in the castle, navigation isn't about steel. It's about precision. Saying just enough. Never too much. Knowing when to bow and when to lean forward. knowing which silk robe to wear and which sandals to leave just slightly askew, so you seem respectful but not subservient. It's a whole martial art of its own. Outside the window, you glimpse the castle courtyard. A group of younger samurai is training, wooden bakken crashing together in sharp bursts of movement. You watch them between discussions about flood relief budgets and shrine donations. That used to be you. It still is, in a way. You've just shifted the battlefield. One final matter is raised: a proposed sword policy for traveling samurai through neighboring provinces. You lean forward. This is important. They're debating whether armed samurai should declare their weapons at each domain border, even if just passing through. Some argue it's a matter of trust. Honest men have nothing to hide. Others call it an insult. We are samurai, one huffs. We carry the soul of our station. You keep quiet, but your thoughts wander. Carrying the soul of your station. Isn't that the problem? When you tie your identity to a blade, it gets tricky to see yourself without it. Historians still debate this very tension. Did the sword define the samurai? Or did the samurai define the sword? You excuse yourself at the end of the council, bowing low and thanking your host. As you leave the chamber, the air feels lighter. The castle guards glance your way, but don't stop you. You're known here now, respected. And you're not carrying a sword. You step into the bright courtyard, sun warming your face. The young trainees are still at it, sweaty, determined, unaware of the scrolls that truly rule the land. One of them nods at you, half in awe. You nod back, amused. He probably thinks you left your sword somewhere important, that you've transcended into something special. Maybe you have. Or maybe you just know that peace is its own kind of blade, sharp, quiet, and very, very rare. The road back from the castle hums beneath your sandals. Dust swirls lazily in the air, rising in ghost-like puffs with every step. You pass rows of thatched roof homes and fields where rice paddies shimmer like wet glass, as if the earth itself is trying to reflect the sky's mood. You notice a group of peasants working shoulder to shoulder, bent low in unison like prayerful cranes. None look up, but you can feel their awareness of you, how your presence registers like thunder in the background. Not because of what's at your hip, but because of what's not. You're that samurai, the one who walks swordless in public. Bold move? Maybe. Foolish? Depends on the day. In Edo, Japan, especially under the Tokugawa shogunate, samurai were required by law to wear daisho, the paired swords katana and wakizashi, as both weapon and status symbol. But not all laws were enforced evenly. And sometimes leaving your swords behind wasn't just legal, it was strategic. Today you're headed to a tea house. Not to duel, not to collect taxes, but to gather information, which, ironically, requires a much sharper sense of subtlety than any blade. You slip through a wooden doorway covered with faded Norn curtains. Inside, it smells of roasted barley tea and cedar. A breeze stirs the paper lanterns overhead. A geisha glides past you, nodding politely. Her face is painted calm, but her eyes are mirrors, sharp, catching everything. You take your seat on the tatama floor. Soon others arrive. A ronin with a lazy gait. A merchant with hands too soft to be honest. A monk whose robe smells faintly of sake. You're all here under different pretexts. But the unspoken truth hangs in the room like steam over miso soup. You're exchanging knowledge. And no one brought a sword. Because swords bring attention. And attention kills rumors before they bloom. You lean toward the merchant, smiling like you're asking about market prices. In reality, your words are a veiled inquiry about troop movements along the western road. He hesitates. If you had a katana across your lap, he might lie, or worse, shut down completely. People get twitchy when steel's in the room. The absence of it? That's your real leverage. This is the flip side of being a samurai during peacetime. While some cling to their warrior identity like armor, others, like you, learn to wield the invisible. Influence, rumor, the weight of your name. And sometimes your absence says more than your presence ever could. Historically, some scholars believe this shift into espionage and subtlety was a natural evolution. Others argue it was a humiliating detour, a slow dilution of the warrior spirit. Samurai weren't meant to be spies, they say. But history has no reverse gear. Still, you know there's truth to both views. You've had to become part warrior, part shadow. And today's meeting is part of that. The merchant eventually leans in. Troops are moving, he murmurs. But not west. South. You nod. That's all you need. Information confirmed. Now, a bit of trivia to season the mood. Did you know that some samurai turned to coded poetry as a form of intelligence gathering? Yep, haiku became tools of espionage. Imagine hiding battle plans in 17 syllables. Blades rust in silence / moonlight bends across rooftops / guards whisper of change. Poetic but deadly. The meeting ends. Everyone rises at a different pace. No signal, no shared glance, just an unspoken ballet of discretion. You step outside, blinking in the sun. And that's when you see him. A younger samurai, maybe 19, striding up the road with a long katana swinging confidently at his side. He walks like he owns the street, eyes forward, jaw clenched. He sees you. His steps falter for a beat. He looks down, no swords. Just your travel sash and ink-stained sleeves. He sneers. Forgot something, old man? Ah, youth. You almost laugh. Almost. But instead, you bow ever so slightly and say, "No, I remembered everything." He scoffs and keeps walking. You don't turn around. Because here's the thing that younger warriors don't yet understand. Swords are loud, even when they're sheathed. They say too much before you even speak. In your line of work, that's a liability. You keep walking, winding toward the edge of town where a weathered shrine rests beneath a massive ginkgo tree. The yellow leaves flutter like tiny flags of peace. You kneel before the shrine and offer a coin. Not for luck, for clarity. And while you're there, you remember a story. One told by your grandfather when you were still practicing footwork on dewy grass. He said there was once a samurai so skilled, he wore no swords for the last 10 years of his life. Not because he couldn't win a fight, but because he knew no one would dare challenge him. His presence alone was his blade. Historians still debate whether this man really existed, or if he was just a tale invented to soothe aging warriors into retirement. Either way, the moral stuck. True power doesn't shout. You rise and dust your knees. A crow caws overhead, flying lazy loops against the sun. And once again, your hand twitches reflexively to your hip, but there's nothing there. And that's okay. Back on the road, you pass another traveler, an old woman carrying bundles of kindling. You offer to help, and she eyes you cautiously, then hands over a bundle. "Samurai don't usually carry wood," she mutters. "Samurai don't usually carry rumors either," you reply with a wink. She doesn't get it, but chuckles anyway. And so you walk, one bundle heavier, but swordless and light. The truth is, not carrying your sword today doesn't make you any less of a samurai. If anything, it makes you more dangerous, because anyone can swing a blade. But to walk through a world full of blades, unarmed and unafraid, that takes a different kind of courage. You return home as dusk kisses the rooftops. Crickets chirp. The smell of grilled eggplant floats from a nearby house. You unroll your mat, pour some tea, and sit by the paper wall. Your sword leans nearby in the shadows, silent, still, content to be unneeded. Tomorrow, maybe you'll wear it again. But tonight, you rest easy. Because when it comes to being a samurai, the sharpest thing you can carry is knowing when not to. The thunder rolls softly over the mountains in the distance. Not the dramatic, heart-pounding crash of a summer storm, but a low rumble, like someone dragging a heavy chair across a vast wooden sky. You pause under the sagging awning of a noodle stall, slurping the last of your miso broth while pretending not to notice the curious stares. No swords. Again, you're becoming infamous for that now. The rain begins in slow, uneven drops, pattering across your travel coat like a restless drumbeat. The stall owner, a wide-eyed man with a missing front tooth, asks if you're a monk. You smile, tell him not quite. It's easier to let people wonder, especially when today's mission takes you into a different kind of battlefield. One not marked by blood or banners, but by ledgers, rice shipments, and the ever-bubbling politics of land taxes. You walk south, along a worn stone path flanked by cedar trees so tall they could touch the ancestors. The wind carries the scent of wet bark and iron-rich soil. You're heading to a kara, a storehouse and administrative post in a small village nestled like a secret between ridges. Today's job isn't to fight. It's to verify a rumor. A local magistrate, supposedly skimming tax rice and blaming phantom bandits. If you show up bristling with blades, his defenses go up. But walk in as a swordless traveler with ink stains and worn sandals? You might just hear the truth spill out like spoiled sake. As you approach the kara, you pass a group of barefoot children chasing a bamboo hoop down the path, shrieking with laughter. One stops, pointing at you. "Mama, that samurai forgot his sword." Their mother hushes them, bowing quickly as you pass. You return the gesture with a wink and a crooked smile. It's not the first time. Inside the kara, the air smells of damp rice straw and old paper. Baskets of millet sit beside tall shelves lined with scrolls and wooden tablets. You remove your raincoat and step inside the office where the magistrate awaits, round-faced, perspiring already despite the rain. His eyes dart to your waist. Relief flickers when he sees it empty. You sit without being asked. "I heard you've had some trouble," you say softly. "Bandits, was it?" He chuckles nervously. Yes. Very bold, these ones. Took 2 ox carts last month." You nod. And yet no sign of forced entry on the gates. No missing oxen. No injured guards. He stiffens. "They're clever. Clever bandits are rare. Especially ones who only steal tax rice and leave merchant goods untouched." There's a pause. Outside, the rain picks up. Inside, something in him seems to dissolve. He leans in. "They said they'd burn the village if I told anyone. Now we're getting somewhere." You listen. No accusations. Just questions. And the more you ask, the more he confesses, not out of fear, but out of something stranger, gratitude. You're not here to humiliate. You're here to fix. See, carrying a sword into this room would have made it a confrontation. Coming without one, it became a conversation. That's the real game. Historians still argue whether samurai who acted as investigators or regional auditors were abandoning their warrior code or simply evolving with the times. Some say the loss of constant combat turned blades dull and minds sharper. Others believe it was a betrayal, trading honor for paperwork. But as you watch the magistrate quietly arrange to return the stolen rice and send compensation to the farmers, you wonder if maybe, just maybe, influence is the sharpest weapon of all. After the meeting, you're invited to share a meal with the village elders. You accept, more out of politeness than hunger. You sit beneath a low beam in a smoke-filled hall, eating roasted sweet potatoes and sipping weak sake from chipped porcelain. The elders ask no direct questions, but their glances say everything. Why no sword? Are you really samurai? You let the silence answer for you. Then one of them, a shriveled old man with eyebrows like willow branches, mutters, "You carry no blade, but you cut truth clean from lies." There's a quiet ripple of approval. And that, strangely, fills you more than the food. After dinner, you head to the inn. A simple place, sliding paper doors, a bamboo mat for a bed, and the steady sound of rain on the tile roof. You lie down fully clothed, arms behind your head, eyes tracing the dark beams overhead. And your thoughts drift to a story you heard years ago. A tale about a wandering samurai who traveled with a dull sword. Intentionally dulled, mind you. Not because he feared violence, but because he wished to win every battle before it began. Supposedly, he'd draw it with a flourish, and his opponents, mistaking him for a master, would surrender before the first strike. Some say he was a coward. Others say he was brilliant. You close your eyes. Some days, it feels like you're becoming that man. And then a twist. A knock at the door. It's late, too late for visitors. You open it to find a young woman, breathless, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. She bows deeply, wordlessly, then presses the package into your hands and vanishes down the corridor. Inside is a katana. Yours. The one you left behind days ago at your last posting. There's a note. "I kept it safe. But I understand now. You don't need it." You stare at the blade, still as night in its lacquered scabbard. Funny thing about swords. Sometimes they follow you, even when you try to leave them behind. You tuck it beside your mat, not out of necessity, but as a courtesy. It's earned that much. Sleep comes slowly that night, because even unarmed, the weight of your choices clings to you like a second skin. But also, so does the respect. And that's something even the sharpest steel can't command. You awake to a pale dawn breaking through the paper screens, the soft rustle of bamboo leaves whispering secrets outside. Your sword lies quietly on the floor beside you, like a patient shadow waiting for the day to begin. Today, your path leads to a bustling market town, one where the samurai's role is less about battle and more about presence. You trudge down narrow streets where merchants hawk brightly dyed fabrics, fragrant teas, and curious trinkets. The air buzzes with the chatter of townsfolk haggling and laughing, and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings in the distance. No sword again. You know the question will come soon. It always does. A child, wide-eyed, tugging at her mother's sleeve, whispers, "Why don't you carry a sword?" You smile, the kind that hides 1,000 answers. Here, samurai without swords often took on the role of metsuke, inspectors and overseers tasked with keeping peace and order. Their power wasn't drawn from the steel at their side, but from the authority of their office and their reputation. Imagine being the local sheriff, only with fewer guns and more tea ceremonies. You stop before a small wooden shrine where a group of elderly women gather, murmuring prayers for safety and good harvest. They nod respectfully as you pass, their eyes lingering on your empty waist. You return the nod with the subtle grace of someone who knows that honor isn't measured in weaponry alone. Historians still argue whether samurai who disarmed themselves in peaceful times were abandoning their code or adapting to a new era. Some suggest they became bureaucrats in armor. Others believe they found strength in diplomacy rather than the sword. You continue your walk toward the market's heart, where a ruckus has drawn a small crowd. A merchant and a farmer are arguing over the price of rice, both stubborn, both red-faced. It's a trivial spat, but tensions here could flare into violence quickly. You step in smoothly, voice calm but firm. Enough! The crowd parts like a river, eyes settling on you. The merchant glares, fingers twitching toward his concealed dagger. But you raise a hand, steady and deliberate. No sword, no fight. Your presence alone halts the brewing storm. You speak, negotiating terms that please neither side entirely, but settle the dispute peacefully. The crowd disperses, muttering approval and respect. One old man sidles up, grinning. You wield a sword made of words. You chuckle. Better than a blade made of blood. As the sun climbs, you visit a small tea house where you meet an unusual guest, an itinerant poet and scholar with a penchant for paradoxes. He eyes your empty scabbard thoughtfully. Why would a samurai travel without his sword? He asks, sipping delicate green tea. You ponder. Because sometimes the greatest battles aren't won by cutting but by understanding. He nods, intrigued. A lesson often forgotten. You share stories over steaming cups, tales of samurai who preferred wit to war, who solved disputes with poetry and presence. One account speaks of a samurai who painted haikus on his armor to disarm opponents with beauty rather than violence. The poet quotes softly, "A sword unsheathed slash is not always the sharpest slash blade of honor's way." You feel a gentle smile tug at your lips. It reminds you of the story you heard in a distant village. The samurai who dulled his blade intentionally. Maybe you think there's a certain poetry to disarmament. Before you leave, the poet presses a folded paper into your hand, a haiku of his own making. It reads, "Empty scabbard waits, silent guardian of peace, strength beyond the blade." You tuck it inside your coat, a quiet treasure. As dusk approaches, you find yourself back on the edge of town, watching lanterns flicker on like fireflies waking from slumber. The marketplace quiets, the laughter fades, and the world seems to exhale. You sit by a small koi pond, dipping your fingers into the cool water. A single leaf drifts by, carried gently on ripples you can barely see. You realize something simple. The sword may be the samurai's symbol, but the real strength lies in the choices made when the sword is absent. You'll carry your sword again, perhaps soon. But tonight, you rest with the knowledge that sometimes leaving it behind is the sharpest move of all. Historians still debate if samurai without swords were rebels, diplomats, or something in between. But you? You know it's a story told in silence, in moments like this, beneath fading lantern light. You breathe deeply, the air cool and sweet. And you wait. You rise with the sun again, the crisp morning air filling your lungs as you prepare for a journey unlike any before. Today, you're headed toward the mountain monasteries, places where samurai sometimes traded their swords for sutras, seeking enlightenment over combat. The path winds through thick cedar forests, shadows dancing like ghosts across the mossy ground. Your footsteps soften, blending into the quiet rhythm of the natural world. Birds trill overhead, their melodies weaving into the morning breeze. No sword on your hip. The monks you meet greet you with serene smiles, robes swaying gently as they bow. Their lifestyle is stripped of worldly trappings, and in some cases, samurai who chose this path even relinquished their weapons permanently, embracing the way of Zen over Ken, the way of the sword. You sit with one monk under a canopy of ancient trees, watching the sunlight flicker through leaves like gold dust. He explains that the sword is not just a weapon but a symbol of discipline, focus, and honor. Yet sometimes, he says, the greatest mastery is knowing when not to draw it. You listen, absorbing the quiet wisdom that's as sharp as any blade. Here's a fact for you. During Japan's peaceful Edo period, many samurai became bureaucrats or monks, their swords collecting dust as the need for battle waned. Still, the sword remained a badge of status, worn even in court, though it was often never unsheathed. But here's a quirky twist. Some monks developed sword techniques that could be performed with a wooden stick or even with their bare hands, turning the absence of a blade into an advantage. Martial arts like Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu have roots in these adaptations, emphasizing redirection of force rather than direct confrontation. Historians still argue whether these pacifist samurai truly abandoned violence or merely refined it into something more subtle, more profound. Your host shares an intriguing tale of a samurai monk who once faced bandits with nothing but a prayer and a smile, and lived to tell the tale. No swords, no shouting, just calm presence that unnerved his attackers until they fled. You chuckle softly, thinking about how your own encounters often mirrored this. Sometimes the absence of a sword unsettled people more than its gleam. As the day stretches, you join the monks in chanting, the low hum vibrating through your chest. You feel a strange kinship with these swordless warriors, bound not by steel but by spirit. The sun dips low behind the peaks, painting the sky with hues of crimson and violet. You pack your belongings, ready to descend, carrying with you a piece of that serene strength. Outside, the forest seems to breathe, alive with the promise of night. You glance down at your empty waist and smile. Sometimes, the sword you leave behind speaks louder than the one you wield. You start down the mountain trail, feeling lighter, your steps infused with newfound grace. The monks wave goodbye, their shadows blending into the twilight. You walk on, knowing the sword will come back someday. But for now, you carry only the quiet power of peace. You step into the flickering lantern light of a bustling tea house in a small castle town, where whispers of politics swirl like steam from delicate porcelain cups. The scent of jasmine and roasted barley tea mingles with the low murmur of samurai strategizing late into the night. You lean against the wooden counter, noting the absence of the familiar weight at your side. Your sword remains behind, left in your chamber, as was common here during times of delicate diplomacy. It's not uncommon for samurai to set aside their swords in such places. In courtly settings, carrying a weapon was often forbidden, an unspoken rule to prevent rash violence and maintain decorum. Instead, these warriors wielded their influence through words and subtle gestures, an entirely different kind of power. The presence of your empty scabbard is a silent statement. It says, "I'm here to talk, not to fight." You notice the way eyes flick to you, curious yet respectful. The art of conversation here is as sharp as any blade. Verbal duels can decide fates quicker than steel. A seasoned retainer slides beside you, speaking quietly about a recent controversy involving a daimyo's succession, one that has split loyalties and stirred unrest. The politics in these times were a tangled web where trust was as scarce as rain in the dry season. Did you know? During the Edo period, samurai often served as bureaucrats and advisors rather than warriors. Their swords were sometimes purely ceremonial, symbols of rank rather than instruments of war. Yet, they were trained to use their words with the precision of a katana strike. Here's a quirky fact. Some samurai mastered the subtle art of kirigami. Hidden writings passed discreetly in letters, conveying secret orders or warnings without ever unsheathing a sword. It was espionage for the swordless. Historians still debate whether samurai who abandoned their blades in court were true warriors or merely actors in a grand political drama. Did their swords lie idle because peace reigned, or because power had shifted to ink and whispers? You find yourself drawn into a heated debate about honor and loyalty, sipping your tea while carefully watching faces. A young samurai argues fiercely that true strength is always physical, while an older statesman counters that a blade without discipline is just a tool for destruction. You recall stories of the famed warrior Miyamoto Musashi, who once fought with wooden swords and even his bare hands, proving that adaptability was as crucial as the sharpness of the blade. The night deepens, and you slip away quietly, the murmurs of court intrigue fading behind you. Outside, the cool night air brushes your skin, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Your sword waits upstairs, but you feel a different kind of power pulsing within. A reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are won without drawing steel. You step into the shadows, blending into the tapestry of a world where swords may rest, but vigilance never sleeps. You find yourself wandering into the quiet courtyard of a samurai household, just as the first snowflakes drift lazily down from a pale winter sky. The cold bites gently at your cheeks, and the soft crunch of your footsteps in the fresh snow is the only sound. No sword jingles at your side because tonight, this isn't a battlefield, it's a family gathering. Inside, the atmosphere is warm with paper lanterns casting amber pools of light across sliding doors and tatama mats. You hear laughter, the clink of sake cups, and the gentle murmur of conversation. A stark contrast to the stern discipline you associate with warriors. Here, samurai are also husbands, fathers, and sons. You settle on a cushion next to an elderly samurai who regales the room with stories of battles past, but also of lessons learned away from the sword. He says, sometimes, a sword is heavier than the man who carries it. It's a moment of vulnerability seldom shared openly. You notice how, in the family setting, samurai might leave their swords in the entrance hall, a ritual signifying the transition from warrior to kin. The blade stays outside, respect for household harmony taking precedence over readiness for combat. This practice wasn't merely about safety, it was symbolic. To carry a sword inside was to invite conflict into the home. The samurai knew the importance of balance, understanding that strength needed to coexist with peace. You learn that samurai families had strict codes governing the presence of weapons. Even a small mistake, like forgetting to store your sword before entering, could cause scandal or worse, tension that might fester into violence. Here's a fact. Many samurai homes had designated koshiri, special racks or boxes where swords were carefully kept when not in use, emphasizing respect for the weapon and the household. But quirky enough, some samurai wives were trained in naginata, a pole weapon, to defend the home should danger come when men were away or unarmed. Imagine that, a housewife wielding graceful yet deadly swipes, ensuring the family's safety. Historians still argue whether samurai household practices evolved from purely practical safety concerns or deeper cultural notions about separating the worlds of war and family. You sip warm sake, watching a young samurai carefully polish his blade beside the hearth, the firelight catching the polished steel with a gentle gleam. He looks up and smiles, a reminder that the sword is both a tool and a symbol, sometimes best set aside. Outside, the snow thickens, muffling the world in silence. You feel the peace settle around you, a reminder that even the fiercest warriors need places where they can rest their burdens. Your own sword waits outside the house, resting quietly on its rack. And for tonight, that's just where it belongs. You slip quietly through the bustling streets of a castle town during festival season, lanterns glowing like fireflies against the twilight. The air is thick with the scent of grilled fish, sweet rice cakes, and laughter spilling from open doorways. Samurai are mingling with townsfolk, their usual stoic expressions softened by the festive spirit. You notice something odd. Many samurai carry no swords tonight. Festivals were unique moments when the rigid boundaries of samurai life relaxed, if only briefly. The presence of swords was sometimes discouraged or outright banned, to prevent unnecessary violence amid the crowds. Instead, the samurai's dignity and honor needed to shine through behavior alone. You find yourself drawn to a group playing a game of hanetsuki, a kind of badminton using wooden paddles. One samurai laughs heartily after missing a shot, his sword noticeably absent, tucked safely away. The scene feels surreal, warriors embracing joy without their ever-present blades. A historical fact, during some Edo period festivals, authorities issued strict regulations on weapon carrying, requiring samurai to leave swords at home or designated places, partly to maintain public safety and order. But here's a quirky tidbit. In certain regions, samurai would sometimes disguise their swords as everyday objects, like umbrella handles or walking sticks, allowing them to keep their weapons hidden in plain sight. This clever camouflage showed how deeply entwined swords were with identity, even when they weren't openly carried. Historians still debate whether such disguises were widespread or mostly myth. Some say tales of hidden swords grew from exaggerations or theatrical flair. You watch as a young samurai performs a dance, his movements fluid and precise without the need for his katana. It's a reminder that their strength was not just physical but also cultural, an intricate dance of tradition and adaptation. As fireworks bloom overhead, you realize how much samurai relied on context. Knowing when to wield their sword and when to set it aside was part of their code. Carrying a blade was not always the point. Sometimes the unspoken respect commanded by leaving it behind was more powerful. The night carries on, a tapestry of light and sound blending past and present. You smile at the thought that sometimes forgetting a sword wasn't a failure, it was a choice. You wander through the festive crowd, feeling lighter, more connected to this world where honor lives beyond the edge of steel. You step into the quiet early morning mist that drapes the village like a soft blanket, the air crisp and filled with a faint scent of wet earth and blooming chrysanthemums. The world feels paused, holding its breath between night and day. As you walk the narrow paths, you notice a few samurai preparing to depart for a mission, their faces calm yet alert. But some, surprisingly, have left their swords behind. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Why would warriors set off without their trusted blades? But here's the reality. Not all missions demanded the clatter of steel. Sometimes discretion, diplomacy, or stealth was more crucial than force. A samurai sword was not just a weapon, it was a statement. Leaving it behind could be a deliberate message of peace or subtlety. The samurai you observe are moving carefully, aware that the journey ahead requires more than brute strength. They carry scrolls, seals, and coded letters, tools of communication and influence. In the fog, you hear the soft footfalls of the party blending with nature's hush. Historically, samurai often served as envoys or messengers, roles where carrying swords openly might provoke hostility or suspicion. Sometimes being swordless was the best armor. Here's a quirky note. During some covert missions, samurai disguised themselves as merchants or monks, fully forsaking their weapons to blend into the crowd. This tactic was risky but effective, showing their adaptability beyond the battlefield. Historians still argue whether such swordless missions were common practice or rare exceptions. Some believe these stories romanticize the samurai's versatility, while others point to ample records supporting the strategy. You watch as the party disappears into the thickening fog, their silhouettes fading. You feel the weight of choices behind the simple act of leaving a sword behind. The balance between honor and survival, tradition and necessity. Remember the delicate dance from the festival? The careful politicking at the court? And now this quiet departure into the unknown. All pieces of the samurai's complex world where sometimes not having your sword was just as meaningful as wielding one. The mist swallows the last traces of their footsteps, and you take a deep breath, the cool air filling your lungs with the promise of stories yet untold. You turn back, the village slowly waking, and the knowledge settles softly. A samurai's strength was measured not only by the sword they carried, but also by the wisdom to know when to leave it behind. The night winds down gently, like a slow river meandering through quiet valleys. Your breath softens, your thoughts ease, drifting away from the clamor of swords and battles. Imagine the samurai, long ago laying down their weapons to rest, their hearts still steady and minds calm. The sword is heavy, yes, but the greatest strength lies in peace, patience, and understanding. Outside your window, the world is hushed, wrapped in a blanket of stillness. The stories you've traveled through tonight are shadows and light, whispers and echoes. Reminders that sometimes the bravest thing is to set down your sword and walk forward with open hands. Feel your eyelids grow heavier as the gentle hum of night carries you deeper into calm. Tomorrow holds its own battles, its own choices. But for now, let yourself rest in the quiet knowing that strength lives in many forms. Softly, slowly, the night carries you away on a gentle breeze. Breathe in the peace. Let the sword rest. And as you drift into dreams, know this. Honor is not just in the clash of steel, but in the quiet courage of letting go. Sweet dreams.